A lot of things to look forward to. One of them is something that I used to not look forward to at all. That's air travel. It's not that I minded so much going places, but hated the experience of being in the airport, paying $20 for a nasty sandwich, but most of all was going through security. TSA has probably taken years off of my life, if I'm honest, because it felt like decades of my life just getting through. And I don't know if you guys remember this, but they used to have the color-coded signs for our level of Homeland Security. Red, orange, yellow, the one I never saw, blue, and green. That sign was supposed to tell us how severe the risk of a terrorist attack was. Practically, what it really told us was how long it was going to take us to get through TSA and how thorough they were going to be in searching our bags, making sure that the amount of toothpaste that I was taking to Haiti was not a threat to anyone. But I wonder what percentage of people can tell right now what color our threat level is at. Or how many people know that we don't actually even color code our threat level anymore. In fact, in 2019, we abandoned that system altogether. We still say that if there's a threat, there's an alert that goes out, and we say, if you see something, that's right. If you see something, say something. Because we're all supposed to be on the lookout. But now, in our current situation, we face a threat that we can't see. A threat that's made us really suspicious. In fact, a cough from a stranger can cause whiplash in those trying to identify the subject in the Kroger. We're on edge, and more than a few people are at the frayed ends of their sanity. Old habits are reappearing. We're fighting not only fear, but we're fighting the fear of fear. Conspiracies are all about. I think about this weekend was an opportunity that I planned to see a concert that I wanted to go to most of my life. Got canceled, got changed. But it pales in comparison, the frustration that I feel from that, to what other people are suffering and actually what other people are losing. This is an incredibly difficult thing, this threat that we can't see. So this threat that we have that we can't see can actually hurt us. It's kind of like the event horizon of a black hole. We know that it's there, but we only know its presence by the circumstances around it. We can't see the very thing that we're afraid of, but we do see the way it impacts things going on around us. We know something's there. We're not really sure how to handle it. We want to be safe, and so we come up with a list of protocols to make ourselves safe. And we hope that it all works out. Protocols are different depending on which group of people you listen to. There's a lot of confusion, but everybody's trying to set up some circumstance in which they can have safety from the thing that they can't see because there's a danger there. We've seen its power. The same type of behavior has been happening since the beginning of time. We recognize that something exists. We fear or we revere it. And we develop a list of protocols to address what we can't see. It's something that we end up calling religion. And depending on our understanding of the truth, that religion can be a wonderful or terrible thing. When religion is the protocol created to respond to something that we can't see based on fear, it's a terrible thing. Paul sees it in the people of Athens. And in the 17th chapter of Acts, he addresses their religious nature and he corrects their misunderstanding. Acts chapter 17, we'll start in verse 22. Paul had been in Athens for a while. Actually, in verse 16, we read the words, "While Paul was waiting for them in Athens, he was greatly distressed to see that the city was full of idols." So this city is completely full of all these religious objects, all these things which people worship, revere, pray to, think about, things that they appraise as being their safety from what they can't see. So when we get to verse 22, when Paul's talking to the people at the Areopagus, he says, "Men of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious. For I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship. I even found an altar with this inscription, 'To an unknown God.' Now, what you worship as something unknown, I'm going to proclaim to you." Paul starts off by talking to him and says, "I see you're very religious." People today are often heard saying, "Well, I'm spiritual, just not religious." Or, "I'm not religious, but I am spiritual." Eschewing the idea of religion, because religious can still mean a lot of things. When Paul uses it, even in that time, depending on where you read it and who's doing the writing, it can mean something positive or it can mean something negative even then. It can mean that a person is devoted to spiritual things. It can mean that a person takes spiritual things very seriously and faithfully lives out their life with a reverence to God. But it can also mean people who go through the motions of faith, or people who use religious exercise to imply something about themselves which is different than the truth. And it can even mean superstition. People who do things in order to try to manipulate the spiritual forces around them. The audience for Paul would have almost certainly assumed that he's commending them. "I see that you're very religious. I see that you're a very thoughtful person." And so they started to listen and gave audience to Paul's words. But just as they took it to mean one thing, Paul meant the other. Verse 23, "For as I've walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I found an altar with this inscription, 'To an unknown God.'" There's the evidence of their belief all around. So many altars, so many idols, all throughout the city. You couldn't look anywhere without seeing something to remind you of their religious beliefs. They're calling people to honor and respect the gods by making them ever visible. And we still, throughout history, have done that. Whether it's ancient Egypt, whether it's Mesopotamia, wherever we find religions, we would find in the center of the place temples, things, spires, things that lift up so that it will draw our eyes to our thoughts about spiritual things and the deities that we believe in. So Paul sees these altars all around the city, and then there's this one altar to an unknown God. Paul actually takes a little bit of liberty here. The altar that was blank there was to the unknown gods. It's plural. Paul goes ahead and he makes it singular because he's going to tell them the truth about the one true God. But they had so many gods that just in case they didn't want to offend somebody, because their belief is that the gods are vindictive and the gods are capricious and the gods are to be feared. They built an altar to keep from offending. And that is the worst kind of religion. A religion of fear. A religion based on superstition, that if I'm just nice to whatever these forces are, and I pay them respect, then they're not going to hurt me. So Paul corrects the inscription and the perception, hopefully, from gods to God. And he lets them know something. He is going to proclaim the truth to them. Ignorance isn't necessary. Let me show you what you built an altar because you couldn't see. Verses 24 through 28, he starts into this sermon. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth and does not live in temples built by hands. And he is not served by human hands, as if he needed anything, because he himself gives men life and breath and everything else. From one man he made every nation of the earth, that they would inhabit the whole earth and determine the time set for them, the exact places they should live. God did this so that people would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he's not far off from each of us. For in him we live and move and have our being. As some of your own poets have wrote, we are his offspring. Seeing the one true God beyond the empty altar. The table is empty. The great thing about what Paul's pointing them to is that instead of looking for something to put there, there's nothing in your way to see God revealed in what he's created. There's no impediment to what you can perceive. God doesn't live in human temples. He's not confined to a place. If there's anything that we have re-emphasized time and again in the midst of our lockdowns and quarantines and all things that have been going on, is that God is not confined to a building. And he's not served by human hands. Verse 25. He's not served by human hands because he's not conformed by our images. He's not controlled by our actions, and he's not constrained by our understanding. The reason idolatry is such a problem is that it's based on the limit of our own understanding. So as soon as we begin to craft something in God's image, it's limited to the work of our hands. But when the altar is empty, instead of my gaze stopping at something that someone has made, my eyes go beyond it to everything that God has made. God is revealed in his creation, not the creation of human hands. He's not controlled by our understanding. The worst kind of religion is that superstitious fear that if I throw the salt over my shoulder, or if I do whatever the current prescription is, that I'm going to be safe. Knock on wood. The truth of faith in God takes us beyond that. Because God is not the actor in our superstitious script. He gives life and breath to all. So I look over the table and I see his work, verse 26 and 27. From one man he made every nation of men, that all would inhabit the whole earth, determine the time set and exact places where we would live. God did this so that people would seek him, perhaps reach out to him and find him, even though he's not far off. The evidence of God is all around in everything that he's created, in the beauty of what he's created, and the fact that he is the creator. All of this exists because he spoke it into being. And even though we can't see him completely, we see his handiwork all around us. I see God not by creating something to represent him on an altar, but by seeing him revealed in all that he has created. He gives life and breath to all of us. We see him in the things that he's created and us, one another. And even the people that built the altar agree. Paul makes that point. Verse 28, for in him we live and move and have our being. As some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring. They built a religion to satisfy the need in them, but they couldn't see God for themselves. They couldn't satisfy themselves or God by building those things. God isn't satisfied by the altar or the thing that we give or the thing that we create. He's not served by our hands. He's worshiped by our faith. Even though they felt the gravity of God around them, they couldn't feel the substance of God beneath them. So they built an empty altar, and the empty altar is a great representation because God's not sitting there. God's everywhere. And the call that Paul gives is to understand God isn't to be feared for what he will destroy. He's to be loved because he's the one who creates. Even though we don't see him, our faith isn't built on fear of him, but hope in him. Verse 29, therefore, because we see all that he's done, because even our entire history has pointed to this, even though all of us feels this pull in our heart, and we hadn't quite nailed it down yet. Verse 29, therefore, because of that, and we are God's offspring, we should not think of the divine being as like gold or silver or stone, an image made by man's design and skill. In the past, God overlooked such ignorance, but now he commands people everywhere to repent. So we know that God's not constrained by what I can build. We know that he's bigger than anything that I can do. We know that he's not located in a place, and even though we still can't see him, we know he's present. We're not constrained by fear because verse 31, he said a day when he'll judge the world with justice by the man he appointed. He's given us proof to this to all people by raising him from the dead. What does it mean to be children of God? We let the creation reveal God. We don't build idols to draw our eyes to and our thoughts to. We don't draw limited expressions of who God is. Because while there's comfort in being able to see something, it makes us feel in control, it assuages our fear, but we are not. We are not in control. And God is not confined by the work of our hands. That's a good thing. Because when we allow God to be unseen, we can witness the power of the Creator and the goodness of the Creator. I can allow God to be unseen because when I look at his creation and I see the beauty and the goodness in the creation, when I see the beauty and the goodness in people, when I see the value that God has placed in humanity, it changes my attitude. I'm not superstitious and fearful. I am faithful and hopeful. We need to let the false religion go. Stop trying to constrain God. Stop making God about a place and a time and an image. But see the proof of his person in the power of Jesus Christ. Because the thing that all people fear is death. It's the reason that the person with allergies who's clearing their throat in the next aisle makes the hair stand up in the back of our necks. We're afraid of destruction. But faith in God means that instead of creating some sort of spiritual protocols and a religious expression in order to keep us safe because we can't see him, is revealed in the person of Jesus Christ, the one who overcame death. The resurrection of Jesus Christ shows that not only is God the creator, but God has power over all things and calls us to hope. He didn't create us for destruction. He created us for life. And Jesus came that we might have life and life to the full. He's promised us eternity. And the Creator is revealed in what Jesus has done. And so we don't look at an empty altar to try to find something to place there. We look over top of the emptiness of that altar into a universe full of God's beauty in creation. Because religion that teaches us to fear what we can't see makes us suspicious of everything around us. And it's not worth the empty altar that it's built on. But faith that's built on what God has done, shown in creation and the resurrection of Jesus Christ, is the hope of eternity. The poets and the prophets and every one of our hearts cries out for that. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1. Faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. So much of our lives right now is being impacted by the belief that what we can't see can hurt us. But faith, eternity, hope, and all that God has done for us throughout the world, creation, and eternity is found in this truth. That what we can't see will save us. We're called to be a people of faith. Faith, hope, and love. And I pray that our actions, attitudes, behaviors, all through this time and always, reflect those values. We're not a people from a religion of fear. We're a people with a faith and hope based on what we see as we look beyond that empty altar in Athens to an eternity guaranteed by the resurrected Creator. Take that message with you and be well.